17-year-old Emily Carter vanished without a trace, and 3 months later, her decomposed body was discovered in the trunk of world-famous pop star Adrian Cross's car, a chilling connection between innocence and fame that no one saw coming. It started with a smell that neighbors could not ignore. For several days, people living along the quiet cul-de-sac had complained of a strong, sour odor drifting through the air, especially at night when the breeze carried it across the lawns. At first, some thought it was a dead animal nearby, perhaps something trapped in the sewers or under a porch. But the stench lingered, grew stronger, and always seemed to come from the same direction, toward the black luxury sedan parked just outside the iron gates of the mansion at the end of the street. The mansion itself was a landmark, impossible to miss. Everyone in the neighborhood knew who lived there. It belonged to a pop star, a young singer who had built a massive career filled with sold-out tours, flashing cameras, and adoring fans. Even though his home was protected by tall walls and security cameras, his car sat outside for days without moving, tucked against the curb as though forgotten. Its dark tinted windows revealed nothing inside, and its polished exterior still caught the glow of the streetlights each night. But the smell pouring from it was undeniable, and it made the neighbors uneasy. Finally, someone made the call to authorities. When officers arrived, they circled the vehicle, noting how it appeared locked and undisturbed. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place, yet the officers recognized the foul odor immediately, an unmistakable scent that only comes from human decomposition. They requested backup and forensic units before daring to open the trunk. Residents stood at their windows, watching the flashing lights and the slow, tense movements of the officers, sensing that something terrible was about to be revealed. When the trunk was forced open, the scene was worse than anyone could have imagined. The air filled with a suffocating wave of decay. Inside, bundled beneath layers of torn fabric and old stage equipment cases, lay a human body. The remains were decomposed, fragile, and twisted, making identification impossible at first sight. Gloves and masks could not shield the officers from the horror. They worked carefully, shining their flashlights over every detail, documenting the grim discovery. The vehicle was immediately taped off as a crime scene, and the street that once echoed with the laughter of children riding bicycles now turned into a place of whispers and dread. News traveled fast. Within hours, the story spread beyond the cul-de-sac, drawing reporters and camera crews who crowded at the edge of the police perimeter. The idea that a superstar's car contained such a dark secret stunned the public. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The smiling image of a beloved musician versus the reality of a rotting corpse hidden inside his luxury vehicle. Even before the identity of the victim was known, the speculation began. How long had the body been there? Who was the victim? And most urgently, what role did the famous owner of the car play in all of this? For the neighbors, the image of flashing police lights against the mansion gates would forever be burned into memory. They had once lived alongside fame, admiring the glamorous parties that occasionally spilled into the street. But that night, the mansion transformed into the backdrop of a nightmare. A single car, forgotten on the curb, had changed everything. The body was carefully removed from the trunk and transported to the city morgue under heavy police escort. Investigators knew this was no ordinary case. The moment they realized the car belonged to a world-famous singer, the pressure mounted from every direction. Detectives, forensic teams, and even federal agents were called in to ensure nothing was mishandled. Every detail mattered. The remains were badly decomposed, making visual identification impossible. What little clothing clung to the fragile body was shredded and unrecognizable, leaving only fragments to work with. Forensic pathologists began their painstaking work, taking samples of teeth, bones, and hair in hopes of building a profile. The process stretched over weeks, each test pushing investigators closer to the truth. The autopsy revealed bruising and fractures, evidence that the victim's death was not natural. The body had been concealed for a long period, wrapped in fabric that still carried faint traces of perfume and soil. Every discovery painted a picture of a young life cut short, but the mystery of who this person was lingered heavily. While authorities remained silent, the media exploded with theories, each headline more shocking than the last. The singer's name was dragged into every conversation, and public curiosity only grew. At last, the results of DNA testing came back, and with them, a devastating confirmation. The body belonged to a 17-year-old girl who had been reported missing 3 months earlier. Her name was known in her community, her photograph once plastered on missing person posters taped to lampposts and pinned to community boards. She had been last seen leaving a school event late in the evening, promising to call her parents, but never making it home. Search parties had combed through parks, abandoned buildings, and back roads, but no trace of her had been found. The case had slowly faded from the headlines as weeks turned into months, leaving her family to endure the agonizing silence of not knowing. The discovery brought that silence crashing down. When the identification was made public, the news devastated those who had held on to hope. Her classmates remembered her as full of energy, someone who lit up every room she entered. Her parents were left shattered, forced to relive the nightmare of her disappearance, now amplified by the horror of where she had been found. Vigils were organized, candles lit, and tears shed as the community tried to come to terms with the loss of someone so young and innocent. Investigators, meanwhile, faced a storm of new questions. How had the teenager's body ended up in the trunk of a car belonging to a famous singer? Was there a connection between them, or was the car used without his knowledge? Every angle had to be explored, every timeline reconstructed. Detectives pulled her phone records, traced her last movements, and scoured surveillance footage in search of answers. The world was watching, demanding justice, but inside the investigation room, nothing yet fit neatly together. The horrifying discovery had solved one mystery, the question of what had happened to the missing girl, but it opened a door to an even darker one. Why her life ended in such a way, and how fame had become entangled in tragedy. As detectives turned their attention to the singer, they began piecing together a life that seemed carefully constructed to hide what lay beneath. On stage, he was dazzling, flashing lights, choreographed perfection, and lyrics that carried him to international stardom. Off-stage, he lived behind tall gates and guarded privacy, with an entourage that acted as both shield and shadow. He was adored by millions, his image built on charm and glamour, yet investigators found whispers of something far less polished. Former assistants, backup dancers, and tour staff began to speak, each revealing pieces of a darker story. The picture that emerged was of a man consumed not only by fame, but also by secrecy. Those who had once worked close to him described strict rules within his mansion. Phones were often confiscated at the door, and no one was allowed to record what happened inside. Visitors were ushered in at odd hours, and the singer's inner circle made sure no curious eyes lingered too long. Parties would stretch into the early morning, filled with strangers and excess, yet the neighbors rarely saw anyone leave through the front gates. It was a carefully maintained illusion. The world saw a smiling celebrity, but behind the walls, control and fear seemed to govern everything. Surveillance footage reviewed by police added fuel to suspicion. The missing girl had been caught on camera entering the singer's mansion weeks before her disappearance. She was wearing a bright jacket, her hair tied back, and she appeared to be following someone inside. That was the last time she was seen alive. What unsettled investigators most was the lack of footage showing her departure. Dozens of guests came and went in the days that followed, but the girl never reappeared. Her phone went silent soon after that night, and her social media activity ended abruptly. Media outlets seized on these revelations, and public opinion fractured. Loyal fans insisted the singer was innocent, claiming he was the victim of those seeking to destroy him. Others were convinced the evidence spoke for itself. pointing to the surveillance footage and the atmosphere of secrecy as proof of guilt. The singer himself remained silent, retreating from the public eye while his representatives issued brief statements denying wrongdoing. But silence only deepened suspicion, and the glare of the spotlight grew hotter with each passing day. The police searched the mansion, combing through rooms, collecting fingerprints, and seizing electronics. Hidden behind the glittering trophies and gold records, they uncovered private spaces locked to nearly everyone but the singer and his closest aides. Within those rooms, they found unsettling traces, scraps of clothing, photographs, and personal belongings that did not belong to him. Each item was bagged and cataloged, each raising new questions about the people who had been brought into his world. The singer's empire of fame began to tremble under the weight of these discoveries. Concerts were canceled, endorsements pulled, and once loyal business partners distanced themselves. What had been a career built on perfection was unraveling. The public image of the glamorous star no longer matched the reality investigators were piecing together. The death of one teenager had lifted a veil, exposing not only the tragedy of her life, but also the possibility that stardom itself had hidden a far darker reality waiting to be revealed. Just as the case seemed to be narrowing in on the singer, investigators uncovered a twist that shifted the entire direction of their work. For weeks, the world had assumed the body in the trunk tied directly to him, but the evidence began to tell a more complicated story. Forensic teams had examined everything inside the car, from the torn fabric to the smallest fibers wedged between the carpet threads. What they found surprised everyone. Along with the victim's DNA, there were clear traces belonging to another man, a member of the singer's inner circle who had been with him for years. The discovery cracked open new possibilities and suggested that the singer may not have acted alone, or perhaps not at all. The man in question was the singer's bodyguard, someone who had worked by his side for nearly a decade. He had access to the house, the cars, the schedules, and even the most private rooms in the mansion. He was more than security. He was trusted with secrets and protected his employer's image fiercely. But financial records revealed something strange. Bank statements showed large payments deposited into his accounts shortly after the teenager went missing, amounts that could not be explained by his normal salary. Investigators saw the payments as potential hush money or compensation for something far more sinister. The bodyguard's history also raised alarms. While on the surface he was a loyal employee, digging into his past uncovered violent outbursts and small brushes with the law that had been buried under non-disclosure agreements and settlements. Several people came forward, describing his intimidating presence and his ability to silence anyone who asked too many questions about the singer's lifestyle. These revelations made detectives wonder if he was the true force behind the crime, using his authority and access to orchestrate events while keeping suspicion focused on his employer. When investigators tried to locate him for questioning, they discovered he had vanished. His phone was disconnected, his apartment abandoned, and his digital footprints carefully erased. He had slipped away just as the investigation turned toward him, leaving behind only questions. The sudden disappearance fueled theories that he had been planning his escape long before the trunk was opened. Some speculated he was being hidden by others within the singer's circle, while others believed he had gone underground on his own, prepared for the day when his past would catch up with him. The case now balanced on uncertainty. Was the singer complicit, or had he been manipulated by those he trusted most? The public's opinion swung wildly between outrage and sympathy. Some believed the singer had been framed by the very people paid to protect him. Others argued that he must have known what was happening in his own home. As police widened their search for the missing bodyguard, the investigation became more tangled, each new lead pulling them further from the simple answers the world demanded. What had begun as a shocking discovery in a car trunk was evolving into a labyrinth of betrayal, money, and power, where no one could be trusted and the truth remained hidden in the shadows. Months passed before the runaway bodyguard was finally tracked down. He had fled across state lines, living under a false identity and moving from one cheap motel to another. Authorities pieced together his trail through bank withdrawals and surveillance cameras until one night he was quietly arrested without warning. The arrest brought a wave of relief to investigators who had been chasing shadows for weeks, but it also raised the anticipation of what secrets he carried. Under pressure and faced with evidence collected against him, the story began to unfold in ways no one had predicted. The truth revealed that the teenager had not been connected to the singer by friendship or fame, but by circumstance. She had stumbled upon something she was never meant to see. While attending one of the gatherings at the mansion, she had accidentally uncovered a side business the bodyguard was running behind the singer's back. It involved laundering money and using the celebrity Ed Yes name as a cover to make the transactions appear legitimate. The girl had no intention of being part of it, but her discovery made her a threat. According to evidence gathered, she confronted the wrong person and soon afterward vanished. Investigators determined that the bodyguard had acted alone in silencing her. He used his position to lure her back to the mansion, where he ensured she could not leave again. After her death, he hid her body in the singer's car, counting on the fame of his employer to shield him. He believed suspicion would automatically fall on the superstar and not on someone in the background. For a time, his plan worked. The glare of the world was fixed squarely on the singer while he slipped away unnoticed. The financial transfers uncovered by detectives now made sense. They were part of his larger operation. Money moved quickly before he vanished to build a life on the run. When this truth came out, the singer was cleared of direct involvement. Yet the damage to his reputation was irreversible. For months, headlines had painted him as a suspect, his face tied to a tragedy that horrified millions. Sponsors had abandoned him, his concerts canceled, and fans divided in their belief of his innocence. Even with his name removed from criminal charges, the shadow of the discovery lingered. The mansion, once a symbol of his success, became a place of infamy, its gates remembered as the site where flashing police lights revealed a nightmare. For the victim's family, the resolution brought a painful mix of answers and grief. They had prayed for her safe return, but instead they received the truth of her final moments. She had been caught in the crossfire of secrets and greed, her young life stolen because of what she had uncovered. Memorials were held, candles lit in her honor, and communities reminded of how vulnerable innocence could be when it crossed paths with power and corruption. The case closed with the bodyguard convicted, his empire of lies dismantled, but the story left behind a chilling reminder. Fame and wealth can draw admiration, yet they can also conceal darkness. Behind the glitter and the music, a teenager's fate had been sealed, hidden in the trunk of a car that the world admired until it became a symbol of horror. The tragedy ensured that no one would ever look at the singer, his mansion, or his success in the same way again.